Isabella Martinez stood in the gleaming lobby of Richardson and Associates, her heart pounding against her designer blazer, a treasured gift from her late mother. At 28, she had climbed from the crowded streets of Brooklyn to become the youngest senior accountant in one of Manhattan's most prestigious firms. But today, something felt wrong. The whispers that followed her through the marble corridors were sharper, more venomous than usual. "Miss Martinez, Mr. Richardson wants to see you immediately." Sandra Cooper, the CEO's personal assistant, delivered the message with barely concealed satisfaction. Isabella had always sensed Sandra's resentment, but today there was something almost predatory in her smile. The elevator ride to the 50th floor felt like an eternity. Isabella's mind raced through the past few weeks, searching for any mistake, any oversight that could explain the knot in her stomach. Everything had been perfect, especially the Morgan acquisition she'd been handling, the biggest deal of her career. William Richardson III's corner office commanded a view of Central Park that usually took Isabella's breath away. Today, she barely noticed it. The CEO sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his silver hair catching the morning light. Beside him stood Marcus Sterling, the firm's golden boy and Isabella's direct superior. The smirk on his perfectly chiseled face made her blood run cold. "Sit down, Miss Martinez." Richardson's voice was arctic. "Would you care to explain this?" He slid a folder across the desk. Isabella's hands trembled as she opened it, and her world collapsed. There, in black and white, were doctored financial statements from the Morgan acquisition, statements showing her signature authorizing millions in fraudulent transactions. I didn't. These aren't my numbers." Her voice cracked. "Someone must have." "Save it," Marcus cut in smoothly. "The evidence is quite clear. You've been embezzling funds through the Morgan acquisition for months. Did you really think you'd get away with it?" Isabella's mind reeled. The numbers, they were her work, but they'd been altered. Sophisticated enough that only someone with intimate knowledge of her filing system could have done it. Someone like... She looked up at Marcus, sudden understanding dawning. Their brief romance 6 months ago, his unexpected interest in her workflow, the late nights he'd spent helping her with the Morgan paperwork. "Marcus, you..." "Security is waiting downstairs," Richardson interrupted. "You'll be escorted out. The police have already been notified." "Mr. Richardson, please," Isabella pleaded, rising from her chair. "I can prove. I trusted you, Isabella." The disappointment in his voice cut deeper than anger would have. "Your background, your story. I thought you were different." "I guess the board was right, some people can't rise above their origins." The words hit like physical blows. Isabella watched helplessly as everything she'd built over the last decade crumbled around her. Her reputation, her career, her dreams, all destroyed by the man she'd foolishly trusted with her heart. As security led her through the lobby, past the whispers and stares of her former colleagues, Isabella caught a glimpse of her reflection in the polished marble walls. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, "Mi hija, in this world, they'll try to break you. But remember, you're a Martinez. We bend, but we never break." Outside, the busy streets of Manhattan continued their eternal dance, oblivious to her personal apocalypse. Isabella clutched her box of belongings, fighting back tears as reporters began to gather. News of financial scandal traveled fast in this city. That evening, alone in her small apartment in Astoria, Queens, Isabella watched her face splash across the evening news. Rising star falls, immigrant success story ends in fraud. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends and colleagues, former friends and colleagues now. But as the night deepened and the initial shock began to fade, something else took root in Isabella's heart. Beneath the pain and humiliation, a steel core of determination began to form. Marcus Sterling and his wealthy cohorts thought they could destroy her with their privilege and power. They thought her story was over. They were wrong. Isabella walked to the window, looking out at the glittering Manhattan skyline. She'd lost everything today, everything except her truth and her dignity. And sometimes, that was all you needed to start again. Opening her laptop, she began to type. She would document everything, every detail, every inconsistency. Somewhere in the numbers lay her vindication. And when she found it, those who had betrayed her would learn what her mother had always known. The most dangerous force in the world isn't power or money, it's a woman who has nothing left to lose. 3 weeks after her public humiliation, Isabella found herself in Joe's Diner, a small establishment in the less glamorous part of Brooklyn. The vinyl booth squeaked as she shifted, staring at her untouched coffee. Her savings were dwindling, and every law firm in New York had politely declined to take her case. Who would believe the word of a disgraced accountant against Richardson and Associates? Mind if I join you? Isabella looked up to find an elderly man in a well-worn suit standing by her table. Something about his keen blue eyes seemed vaguely familiar. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "Not yet," he smiled, sliding into the booth. "But I knew your mother, Rosa Martinez." "I'm Harold Bennett." Isabella's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. Harold Bennett, the name that had appeared in her mother's old letters, the mysterious benefactor who had helped fund her college education. "Why now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because history is repeating itself," Harold replied, pulling out a weathered manila envelope. 25 years ago, William Richardson did the same thing to your mother that his son and Marcus Sterling just did to you." Isabella's world tilted on its axis. My mother worked for Richardson? She was more than an employee. She was William's personal assistant, and they were in love. Harold's words fell like bombs in the quiet diner. Until she discovered his embezzlement scheme. When she threatened to expose him, he did exactly what they did to you: framed her, fired her, and destroyed her reputation. Memories flooded back, her mother's quiet strength, her warnings about powerful men, her insistence that Isabella get an education. She never told me. Rosa was protecting you. She knew if you went looking for revenge, it would consume you. Harold pulled out several documents from the envelope. But she also prepared for this day. She knew the Richardsons would never change their ways. The documents revealed a complex web of fraud spanning decades. William Richardson too had begun the practice, and his son had perfected it. Marcus Sterling was just the latest in a long line of accomplices. Why are you showing me this now? Because unlike your mother, you have the skills to expose them. The evidence is there, hidden in their financial records. You just need access. Harold leaned forward. And I can help you get it. It turned out Harold wasn't just any retiree, he was a former SEC investigator who had spent years building a case against the Richardsons, only to be forced into early retirement when he got too close. There's a position opening at Miller & Hughes, Harold explained. They're a smaller firm, but they handle some of Richardson's auxiliary accounts. With your qualifications. My qualifications? Isabella laughed bitterly. I'm toxic in this industry now. Under your own name, yes. Harold pulled out one more document, a new identity. But Sarah Collins, with her impeccable references from my contacts in Chicago, is exactly what they're looking for. Isabella stared at the paperwork, her mother's voice echoing in her mind, sometimes, Nihija, justice wears a mask. If we do this, she said slowly, we have to do it right. No loose ends, no mistakes. I won't let them destroy another life. That's why we'll need help. Harold gestured to a young man entering the diner. Meet David Chen, former IT specialist at Richardson & Associates. He was fired last year for system irregularities after he accidentally discovered some interesting transactions. David slid into the booth, his boyish face belying a sharp intelligence. Sorry, I'm late. Had to make sure I wasn't followed. Old habits. As they planned late into the night, Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced since that terrible day at Richardson & Associates, hope. But mixed with it was something darker, more potent. The sweet promise of revenge. In her small apartment that night, Isabella stood before her mirror, practicing her new identity. Sarah Collins smiled back at her, confident, polished, unremarkable. Perfect for blending into the corporate background while she gathered the evidence she needed. Her phone buzzed, a news alert. Marcus Sterling had just been promoted to junior partner at Richardson & Associates. The accompanying photo showed him with his arm around Jessica Richardson, the CEO's daughter. Isabella's hand tightened on her phone. Of course, it had all been a perfect plan. frame the immigrant upstart, clear the path to partnership, and cement his position by marrying into the family. Enjoy it while it lasts, Marcus, she whispered to the image. You taught me well, never let them see you coming. Tomorrow, Sarah Collins would apply for her new position. But tonight, Isabella Martinez made a promise to her mother's memory. This time, the Richardsons wouldn't just face exposure, they would face justice. And Marcus Sterling would learn that the heart he'd broken hadn't shattered, it had crystallized into something far more dangerous, pure, unwavering determination. Miller and Hughes occupied a modest office building in Midtown, nothing like the gleaming tower of Richardson and Associates. Isabella, now Sarah Collins, smoothed her newly dyed blonde hair and adjusted her glasses, props chosen carefully to complete her transformation. Your references are impressive, Miss Collins, Thomas Miller said, reviewing her resume. Though I have to ask, why leave Chicago for a smaller firm in New York? Sometimes we need a fresh start, she replied, the practice line flowing naturally. And I believe smaller firms offer more opportunities for meaningful contribution. 2 weeks later, Sarah Collins was settling into her new role. Every night, she meticulously documented the connections between Miller and Hughes and Richardson and Associates. David Chen had equipped her computer with hidden software that tracked every transaction, every digital footprint. But fate had other plans. Sarah, meet our new client liaison. Thomas Miller's voice made her freeze. James Richardson. Isabella's heart stopped. Standing before her was William Richardson's youngest son, the family rebel, who'd supposedly cut ties with the empire years ago. She'd never met him during her time at Richardson and Associates. James Richardson looked nothing like his polished older brother. His suit was expensive but rumpled, his dark hair slightly too long for Wall Street. And his eyes, they held none of the family's trademark arrogance. Please, call me Jamie, he said, shaking her hand. I've been reviewing your work on the Peterson account. Impressive attention to detail. Over the next few weeks, Isabella found herself increasingly working alongside Jamie. Unlike his father and brother, he asked questions, listened to opinions, noticed discrepancies. Something's not right with these transfers, he said one evening, as they worked late. The numbers align, but they're too perfect, Isabella finished, forgetting to be Sarah for a moment. Jamie looked at her sharply. Exactly. Like someone's carefully making them look legitimate. That night, she called Harold in a panic. James Richardson is here. If he discovers who I am. This could work in our favor, Harold interrupted. From what I've gathered, Jamie's been investigating his family's dealings independently. He suspects something, but he can't prove it. Are you suggesting I trust a Richardson? I'm suggesting you watch and wait. Sometimes allies come from unexpected places. The next month brought Isabella dangerously close to discovery. Jamie's presence meant more scrutiny, more questions. But it also meant access to information she'd never expected to find. The Morgan acquisition, Jamie mentioned casually one day. Nasty business with that accountant who tried to embezzle funds. Isabella's fingers stilled on her keyboard. Oh. Something never sat right about that case. The numbers were too clean, the evidence too convenient. He studied her face. You ever notice how perfect crimes usually aren't? Before she could respond, Jessica Richardson swept into the office, elegant as always. Jamie, darling. Taking Daddy's orders to heart, I see? Isabella busied herself with her computer, heart racing. Hello, Jess. Checking up on me? Can't a sister visit? Jessica perched on his desk. Though Father did want me to remind you about the charity gala next week. You are coming, aren't you? Marcus is being promoted to full partner. Wouldn't miss it, Jamie's voice was dry. After Jessica left, he turned to Isabella. Sorry about that. My family can be overwhelming. They seem very close, Isabella managed. Appearances, Jamie sighed. It's all about appearances. That evening, as Isabella reviewed her files in her apartment, she found something strange. Buried in the Charity Foundation's records was a series of transactions matching the pattern from the Morgan acquisition, but dated years earlier. Her phone rang. It was David. Isabella, you need to see this. I've been tracking Marcus Sterling's emails. He's getting nervous. There's talk about cleaning house at Miller and Hughes. They know something's wrong, Isabella realized. They're going to destroy the evidence. There's more, David hesitated. I found old emails between Marcus and Jessica Richardson. They've been planning this for years. Your relationship with Marcus, your downfall, it wasn't just opportunity. It was targeted. Isabella sat in the darkness of her apartment, pieces falling into place. Because of my mother. They knew who I was all along. What are you going to do? Isabella looked at her reflection, Sarah Collins' reflection, in the window. The charity gala was next week. Every major player would be there, William Richardson, Marcus, Jessica, the board members who'd believed their lies. I'm going to attend a party, she said softly. It's time Sarah Collins met the Richardsons. But as she hung up, another thought nagged at her. Jamie's questions, his subtle hints, did he suspect who she really was? And if he did, whose side was he really on? The game was becoming more dangerous. And Isabella was no longer sure who was hunter and who was prey. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom glittered with New York's financial elite. Isabella, dressed as Sarah Collins in an elegant black gown, felt her pulse quicken as she passed through security. David's forged invitation had worked perfectly. Sarah. Jamie's voice carried across the room. I didn't expect to see you here. Mr. Miller insisted I attend, she smiled, the lie smooth as silk. Something about networking opportunities. Then allow me to introduce you around. Jamie offered his arm, and Isabella took it, fighting the urge to scan the room for Marcus. Though I should warn you, the sharks are circling tonight. As if summoned by his words, Marcus Sterling appeared, Jessica Richardson draped possessively on his arm. Isabella's fingers tightened imperceptibly on Jamie's sleeve. Little brother, Jessica's smile was razor-sharp. Who's your charming friend? Sarah Collins, from Miller and Hughes, Jamie replied. Sarah, my sister Jessica and her fiancé, Marcus Sterling. Marcus's handshake was firm, professional. Not a flicker of recognition crossed his face, the glasses and blonde hair had done their job. Collins? Chicago, right? Think I heard about your work there. All good things, I hope, Isabella matched his tone perfectly. Speaking of work, Jessica interjected, Daddy's about to make the announcement. Come on, Marcus. As they walked away, Isabella caught Jamie studying her face. You know, he said quietly, you remind me of someone. Before she could respond, William Richardson's voice boomed through the ballroom. Distinguished guests, family, friends, tonight marks a special occasion. Isabella watched as Marcus took the stage, accepting congratulations on his promotion to full partner. The crowd applauded, and she found herself remembering another ceremony, just months ago, when she'd received her own promotion. Marcus had been there too, watching from the shadows, already planning her downfall. You're very quiet, Jamie observed. Just thinking about justice, she replied, then added hastily, in the corporate world, I mean. How sometimes things aren't what they seem. No, Jamie's voice was thoughtful. They rarely are. As the night progressed, Isabella gathered intelligence through careful conversation. Board members, loosened by champagne, spoke freely about upcoming mergers. Junior partners complained about irregular accounts. And everywhere, she noticed Jamie watching, listening, making his own mental notes. Then she saw it, Marcus slipping away from the crowd, heading toward the hotel's business center. This was her chance. Excuse me, she murmured to Jamie. Powder room. The business center was dark, but Marcus's laptop screen provided enough light to see him frantically copying files. Isabella took out her phone, activating David's recording software. Working late, Mr. Sterling? Marcus jumped. Miss Collins. This isn't what it looks like. It looks like someone covering their tracks. Isabella stepped closer. Or should I say, creating new ones? You don't understand. Don't I? She moved to block the door. Those transfers you're doctoring, they follow the same pattern as the Morgan acquisition. The same pattern used to frame Isabella Martinez. Marcus's face changed, arrogance replacing panic.
You've been investigating us. Someone had to. Do you really think he stopped, really looking at her for the first time?
Understanding dawned in his eyes.
Isabella?
She smiled, removing her glasses.
Hello, Marcus.
Clever disguise, he said, reaching for his phone.
But it won't help you. One call to security. Go ahead, Isabella challenged. Explain why you're here, deleting files before tomorrow's SEC audit. Files that might show a connection to certain offshore accounts. Marcus froze. How did you? You taught me well, remember? Always keep leverage. She held up her phone. Everything you just did is recorded. One click and it goes to every financial journalist in New York. What do you want? The truth. A signed confession about what you did to me.
What the Richardsons did to my mother.
Marcus laughed. You really think you can take down Richardson and Associates with one confession?
No, a new voice said from the doorway.
But she can with two. Jamie stepped into the room, holding up his own phone. Hello, brother-in-law-to-be. Having an interesting conversation?
Jamie, Marcus's voice held genuine fear now.
This isn't what you think. It's exactly what I think. I've been gathering evidence for months. All I needed was proof of active fraud. Jamie looked at Isabella. Though I have to admit, you make a convincing blonde. Ms. Martinez. Isabella's mind raced. Jamie had known. All along, he'd known.
If you expose this, Marcus warned, you'll destroy your own family.
My family destroyed itself, Jamie replied. I'm just making it official.
The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted them. Jessica's voice carried down the hallway, calling for Marcus. Isabella looked at Jamie, a silent question in her eyes.
He nodded slightly.
Tomorrow morning, she told Marcus.
My lawyer's office. Bring your confession, or tomorrow's headline will be very interesting.
As they slipped away, leaving Marcus alone with his betrayal, Isabella felt Jamie's hand on her arm.
We should talk, he said quietly. Behind them, Jessica's voice grew closer, still searching for her fiancé.
But Marcus Sterling remained in the darkness, watching his carefully constructed world begin to crumble. And in that moment, Isabella realized that revenge, like justice, sometimes came in unexpected forms.
The next morning dawned cold and gray. Isabella sat in Harold Bennett's office, watching rain streak down the windows of the modest law firm he'd emerged from retirement to operate.
Jamie leaned against the wall, his usual disheveled elegance somehow more pronounced in the morning light. Start from the beginning, Isabella said.
How long have you known?
Since your first week at Miller & Hughes, Jamie replied.
The way you analyzed the accounts, it was too familiar. Then I found an old photo of your mother with my father. The resemblance is striking.
Harold spread several folders across his desk.
Jamie's been my inside source for years.
When Rosa Martinez died, he was the one who brought me evidence of what his father had done to her.
Why didn't you tell me? Isabella's voice held more hurt than she'd intended. Because I needed to be sure you could pull this off, Jamie said quietly. If my family suspected I was helping you, we'd lose our only advantage. A knock interrupted them.
Marcus Sterling entered, looking considerably less polished than the previous night.
Behind him came David Chen, carrying his laptop.
Before we start, Marcus said, placing a USB drive on Harold's desk, I want immunity.
That's not how this works, Harold replied. But cooperation will be noted.
Over the next 2 hours, Marcus detailed everything, the systematic fraud, the targeted destruction of whistleblowers, the complex web of offshore accounts. Isabella recorded every word, her heart pounding as he described how they'd chosen her for elimination.
It was Jessica's idea, Marcus admitted. She recognized your name when you applied. Said it was poetic justice, using the daughter to cover their tracks just like they'd used the mother. And you went along with it, Isabella's voice was ice.
Pretended to care for me, all while planning my destruction. Business is business, Marcus wouldn't meet her eyes.
Nothing personal.
It was personal to my mother, Isabella stood, her calm facade cracking. It was personal when she died thinking her reputation would never be cleared. When she couldn't get medical treatment because no one would hire her. Jamie moved to her side, his presence steadying. The confession, Marcus. All of it. As Marcus began to write, David's laptop chimed. Isabella, you need to see this. Richardson and Associates is calling an emergency board meeting. They're moving assets. They know. Marcus looked up. Jessica must have followed me last night. We need to move now, Jamie said. Once those assets are gone. A commotion in the outer office interrupted him. The door burst open, revealing William Richardson himself, flanked by security. Jessica stood behind them, triumph in her eyes. Well, William's voice was cold as he surveyed the room. Quite the gathering of conspirators. Hello, Father, Jamie's tone was equally frigid. Wasn't sure you remembered where the working class lived. James. I had hoped Jessica was wrong about your involvement. William's gaze fell on Isabella. And Miss Martinez. Or is it Collins now? Your disguise was quite impressive. Just like your mother, always playing parts above her station. My mother, Isabella stepped forward, was worth 10 of you. Your mother was a thief and a liar, William snapped. Just like her daughter. That's enough. Jamie's voice cracked like a whip. Show them, David. David turned his laptop, displaying a video feed. On screen, dozens of reporters gathered outside Richardson and Associates. In 10 minutes, Jamie said, every major financial news outlet will receive proof of 30 years of fraud. Unless. Unless what? William's facade cracked slightly. Confession. Restitution. Public acknowledgement of what you did to Rosa Martinez and her daughter. Jamie's voice softened. It's over, Father. The question is whether the Richardson name survives at all. William looked at his children, Jamie's quiet determination, Jessica's growing panic, and for the first time, Isabella saw fear in his eyes. Daddy, Jessica stepped forward. You can't seriously. Be quiet, Jessica. William sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. You never understood. Your brother did, but you're too much like me. Sir, Harold slid a document across the desk. Time's running out. As William Richardson began to write his confession, Isabella felt a lifetime of anger and pain begin to shift. She looked at Jamie, who had sacrificed his own family for justice, and at Marcus, destroyed by his own ambition. Your mother would be proud, Harold said softly. Outside, rain continued to fall on New York City, washing away the last traces of Sarah Collins and bringing Isabella Martinez back into the light. But the story wasn't over. In fact, it was about to take its most unexpected turn yet. The media storm that followed William Richardson's confession shook Wall Street to its core. Isabella watched from Harold's office as the empire crumbled, stock prices plummeting, clients fleeing, board members resigning. Richardson pleads guilty to decades of fraud, the headlines screamed. Dynasty falls as family scandal erupts. But victory tasted different than she'd imagined. You're not happy, Jamie observed, joining her at the window. Over the past weeks, he'd become a constant presence, his support unwavering through the chaos. I thought revenge would feel more satisfying? He smiled sadly. Trust me, I understand. The door burst open. David rushed in, his face pale. Isabella, turn on the news. Now. On screen, Jessica Richardson stood before a forest of microphones, tears streaming down her perfect face. My father's confession was coerced, she declared. Isabella Martinez, a disgraced former employee, manipulated my brother Jamie, who has struggled with mental health issues, into helping her destroy our family. She's good, Jamie muttered. Always was the best actor in the family. Mental health issues? Isabella turned to him. I spent 6 months in a private facility after my mother died, Jamie explained quietly. Depression. Jessica knows the media will run with it. Harold entered, looking grave. It gets worse. Jessica's filed for emergency control of the company's remaining assets.
She's claiming temporary insanity for William, citing grief over Jamie's manipulation. Can she do that? With the right judges? Maybe. Harold looked tired.
She's also filed a restraining order against both of you.
Isabella felt the ground shifting again. So we won, but we lose anyway? Not yet. Jamie's voice held steel. Jessica forgot something important. What's that? Our mother. He pulled out an old leather portfolio.
Before she died, she left this with her lawyer.
I've never opened it.
Inside they found letters, photos, and a DVD labeled Simply Insurance. The video showed Jamie's mother, Catherine Richardson, recording a deathbed statement. She detailed years of William's abuse, fraud, and manipulation. But the bombshell came at the end.
Jessica, Catherine's weak voice declared, is not William's daughter.
Her mother was his secretary, Linda Parker. The affair nearly ruined him. He paid Linda millions to give up the baby and disappear.
The proof is in my safety deposit box. Silence filled the office.
All these years, Jamie whispered, she's been trying to prove she's a true Richardson.
And she's not even.
This will destroy her, Isabella realized.
Yes, Jamie agreed. The question is, do we use it?
Isabella stared at the DVD, remembering Jessica's cruel smile at the gala, her calculated destruction of lives.
Yet something held her back. What would your mother want? She asked Jamie.
The same thing yours would want, he replied softly.
Justice, not cruelty.
They developed a new plan.
Harold arranged a private meeting with Jessica at his office. One chance, Isabella told the shocked woman. Sign over control of the company to the independent board we've selected. Publicly retract your statements about Jamie. In return, this stays private. Why? Jessica's perfect facade cracked. Why show mercy? Because I know what it's like to lose your identity, Isabella said. And revenge doesn't heal that wound. Jessica signed the papers with trembling hands.
As she rose to leave, she paused.
I truly am sorry. About your mother. I know, Isabella replied. That's why we're ending this cycle.
Later that night, Isabella sat in her old apartment, surrounded by boxes.
The victory had brought financial restitution, but more importantly, it had brought peace. A knock at the door revealed Jamie, holding takeout bags. Thought you might be hungry.
Always taking care of people, she smiled, letting him in.
Someone has to. He set down the food, then hesitated. Isabella, there's something I've been wanting to tell you.
Her heart skipped. Over these months of fighting side by side, something had grown between them, something neither had dared acknowledge.
Jamie.
Let me finish, he stepped closer. When I first realized who you were, I thought I was helping you for my mother's sake.
For justice. But somewhere along the way,
it became more, she finished.
Much more.
His hand found hers.
The question is, can you love a Richardson?
Isabella looked into his eyes, seeing not the family name that had caused so much pain, but the man who had helped her find justice without losing her humanity.
I already do, she whispered.
As he pulled her into a kiss, Isabella realized that sometimes the greatest victory isn't in destroying your enemies, but in finding the strength to rise above their hatred. And sometimes love comes disguised as justice, waiting for the right moment to reveal its true face.
But even as she melted into Jamie's embrace, a shadow loomed on the horizon. For in the world of power and privilege, happy endings often come with hidden prices.
And someone, somewhere, was already plotting their revenge.
6 months after the Richardson scandal, Isabella and Jamie had built a new life.
They ran a consulting firm helping companies identify financial fraud, their reputation for integrity drawing clients from across the country.
Their relationship had blossomed, though they kept it private to maintain professional credibility. But Marcus Sterling hadn't forgotten.
Released after minimal jail time due to his cooperation, Marcus had lost everything: his career, his reputation, and most importantly to his wounded ego, Jessica Richardson.
Now he nursed his grievances in a small office in Brooklyn, planning his comeback. Mr. Sterling?
His new assistant, Rachel Walsh, entered with coffee.
There's someone here to see you.
Linda Parker stood in his doorway, elegant despite her 60 years. Jessica's biological mother had watched the Richardson scandal from afar, calculating her moment. "I believe we have a mutual interest," she said, settling into a chair.
"My daughter's inheritance." Marcus leaned forward. "I'm listening." Meanwhile, Isabella and Jamie were celebrating their latest success, preventing a major insurance fraud that would have bankrupted thousands of pensioners. To justice, Jamie raised his glass in their favorite restaurant, a small Italian place in Greenwich Village. "To us," Isabella replied, then hesitated. "Jamie, there's something I need to tell you."
Before she could continue, her phone buzzed.
A text from Harold, urgent. "Come to the office. Now."
They found Harold surrounded by papers, his face grim.
"Linda Parker is back.
She's filed a lawsuit claiming Jessica's rights to the Richardson fortune. And she has proof that William Richardson paid her to give up Jessica. The same proof your mother mentioned in her video," Isabella said to Jamie.
"But how did she get it?"
"Because I helped her," a voice said from the doorway.
Marcus Sterling stepped in, looking satisfied.
"Amazing what you can find in old safety deposit boxes with the right connections."
Jamie moved protectively toward Isabella. "What do you want, Marcus?" "Originally? Revenge."
He smiled coldly. "But Ms. Parker made a better offer. See, if Jessica is proven to be William's illegitimate daughter, she has claim to half the Richardson fortune, including the shares currently controlled by your new board."
"You're working with Linda to help Jessica?" Isabella couldn't hide her disbelief. "Jessica doesn't know yet," Marcus admitted.
"But when she learns her real mother has found her, that her true inheritance was stolen, well, let's just say family loyalty can be complicated. This will destroy her," Jamie argued.
"Finding out like this, in public? Like Isabella was destroyed?" Marcus countered. "Like her mother? Sometimes karma takes unexpected forms." After Marcus left, Isabella paced Harold's office. "We can't let them do this to Jessica.
She's changed, she's trying to rebuild her life. The irony," Harold noted, "is that you're now protecting the woman who tried to destroy you." "Because I know what it's like to lose everything," Isabella replied.
"And Jessica's already lost enough." Jamie made a decision. "We need to tell her first.
Before they blindside her." They found Jessica at her new job, teaching business ethics at a community college, of all things. She listened to their warning in silence, her face growing paler.
"I always knew," she finally said. "Somehow, deep down.
The way William treated me differently, pushed me harder.
I thought if I proved myself more Richardson than his real children."
"You are who you choose to be," Isabella said quietly.
"Not what your blood says." "Why are you helping me?" Jessica asked. "After everything."
"Because breaking the cycle of revenge means making different choices," Jamie replied.
"Even when it's hard."
But as they left Jessica's office, Isabella's phone chimed with breaking news. Linda Parker had called a press conference for the next morning. The story was already leaking.
"We need a new plan," Isabella declared.
"One that protects Jessica but also deals with Marcus and Linda." "I might have an idea," Jamie said slowly.
"But you're not going to like it."
As night fell over New York, three unlikely allies, Isabella, Jamie, and Jessica, gathered in Harold's office to plan their countermove. The next 24 hours would either heal old wounds or create new ones that might never mend. And somewhere in the city, Marcus Sterling raised a glass with Linda Parker, both believing victory was finally within their grasp. Neither suspecting that their perfect revenge was about to backfire in ways they could never imagine. For Isabella had learned that true power wasn't in destroying your enemies, but in choosing when to save them. And tomorrow would test that wisdom to its limits. The morning of Linda Parker's press conference dawned bright and cold. News vans crowded outside the Waldorf Astoria, where Linda and Marcus prepared to destroy what remained of the Richardson legacy. But they weren't the only ones with a story to tell. "Are you sure about this?" Isabella asked Jessica, who sat in Harold's office reviewing the statement they'd prepared. "No," Jessica admitted. "But it's time I own my truth. All of it."
Jamie entered, holding his phone. Linda's starting. Time to move. On live television, Linda Parker approached the podium, Marcus hovering supportively nearby.
28 years ago, she began, William Richardson paid me to give up my daughter. Before she could continue, Jessica walked onto the stage. The reporters erupted in chaos.
Hello, Mother, Jessica said calmly into the microphone. I've been expecting you. Linda faltered. This wasn't part of the plan. You want to tell my story? Jessica continued. Let me help you. Yes, William Richardson paid you to give me up. But that's not the whole truth, is it? From the back of the room, Isabella and Jamie watched as Jessica pulled out a document. This is a copy of the original agreement, Jessica announced. The one Mother Dearest here doesn't want public. Because it shows she approached William Richardson with a deal, her silence about his affairs in exchange for a wealthy adoption and ongoing payments. Linda's face went white. Marcus started forward, but security blocked his path. I wasn't abandoned, Jessica's voice carried clearly. I was sold. Repeatedly. Every few years, another threat, another payment. Until William Richardson's legal team made you sign this final agreement. Cameras flashed as Jessica held up the paper. But here's what I never knew until recently. The person who saved all the evidence, who made sure the truth would eventually come out? Catherine Richardson, the woman who raised me. My real mother, in every way that matters. In the ensuing chaos, Linda Parker fled the stage, her perfect revenge ruined. Marcus tried to follow, but found his path blocked by federal agents. Marcus Sterling? An FBI agent stepped forward. We'd like to discuss some interesting transactions from your offshore accounts. Specifically, payments to access private banking records. As Marcus was led away, Isabella felt Jamie squeeze her hand. Their anonymous tip about Marcus's illegal activities had hit its mark. Later, in Harold's office, Jessica slumped in exhaustion. Thank you. All of you. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you stopped me from becoming exactly what everyone expected. Family isn't about blood, Jamie said quietly. It's about choices. Speaking of choices, Isabella took a deep breath. There's something I need to tell you both. She placed a small ultrasound photo on Harold's desk. Jamie's eyes widened. I found out last week, she said softly. I was waiting for the right moment. Jamie pulled her into his arms, laughing and crying at once. Jessica stared at the photo, then smiled a real smile, perhaps her first in years. Well, Jessica said, I suppose this makes me an aunt. If you'll let me be. Isabella looked at the woman who had once tried to destroy her, seeing now someone fighting for redemption. Family is about choices, she echoed Jamie's words. As they left Harold's office that evening, the setting sun painted Manhattan in shades of gold. Isabella thought about the twists of fate that had brought them here, revenge transformed into redemption, enemies into family. What are you thinking? Jamie asked, his arm around her waist. That our child will never have to wonder about their worth, she replied. They'll know that true power comes from breaking cycles, not perpetuating them. But even as they celebrated their growing family, another player waited in the shadows. William Richardson, watching from his luxury prison apartment, received the news of his grandchild with keen interest. Perhaps there was still time for one last game. For in the world of power and redemption, even the happiest moments cast shadows. And some debts, as they would soon discover, refused to be forgotten. 8 months into her pregnancy, Isabella's life seemed perfect. Her consulting firm was thriving, her relationship with Jamie growing stronger, and even Jessica had become a trusted friend. But William Richardson had other plans. From his luxury prison apartment, William made a call to his most loyal employee, Sandra Cooper, his former assistant who had helped destroy Isabella years ago. It's time, he said simply. Execute the contingency plan. The next morning, Isabella received an urgent call from their biggest client. Emergency board meeting. We need you both there. I'll handle it, Jamie insisted, seeing Isabella's exhaustion. You rest. But as Jamie's car pulled away from their brownstone, Isabella felt a familiar dread. Something wasn't right. Her phone rang. David Chen. Isabella, turn on the news. Now. Breaking news flashed across the screen. Massive explosion at Sterling Financial. Multiple casualties reported. The world stopped. Sterling Financial, where Jamie was headed for the emergency meeting. Jamie's not answering his phone. David's voice seemed distant. Isabella? Isabella. She was already moving, calling Harold. Get me everything on William Richardson's communications. Now. Isabella, you need to stay calm. Think of the baby.
William did this, she cut him off. He's finishing what he started with my mother.
Jessica arrived within minutes, taking control. I'm driving. David tracked Jamie's phone. Harold, get us building plans for Sterling Financial.
As they raced through Manhattan's streets, Isabella's mind whirled.
Why now? Why?
Wait, she suddenly said.
The meeting. Who called it? David's voice crackled through the speakerphone. Shacking.
The call came from a burner phone, but I traced the payment.
It was Sandra Cooper. William's assistant. Jessica breathed.
The one who always handled his special projects.
They reached Sterling Financial to find chaos, fire trucks, ambulances, police cordons.
But no sign of Jamie.
His phone's still active, David reported. But it's not in the building. It's 3 blocks east? Following the signal, they found Jamie's phone in a trash can.
Beside it was a note, like mother, like daughter. Some debts must be paid.
He's not dead, Isabella said with certainty. William wants me to suffer first. Jessica's face hardened. Sandra Cooper. She has a lake house in the Adirondacks. William used it for sensitive meetings.
As they sped north, Isabella received a text from an unknown number. Your mother chose pride over survival.
Will you make the same choice? He's trying to force you to choose, Jessica realized. Jamie's life for your silence about the old crimes.
There's more to it, Isabella's mind raced.
William Richardson never does anything without multiple motives.
Harold called with news.
I found something. William transferred millions to offshore accounts last week.
And there's a private plane on standby at a small airport near the lake house.
He's planning to escape, Isabella said.
The explosion was a distraction.
Sandra helps him flee, using Jamie as insurance. But why now? Jessica wondered.
Because in 1 month, I give birth to the next Richardson heir. Isabella's voice was steel.
William's grandson.
He'll never let his legacy be controlled by the daughter of Rosa Martinez. They arrived at the lake house at sunset.
Sandra Cooper's car was parked outside.
David, kill the security system, Isabella commanded.
Jessica, call your FBI contacts.
Harold, be ready with the offshore account records.
Isabella, Jessica caught her arm. You can't go in. Not in your condition. Watch me.
Inside, they found Sandra Cooper waiting with a gun. Behind her, Jamie was tied to a chair, bruised but alive.
Mrs. Richardson, Sandra sneered. Yes, I know about the wedding plans. How fitting that you'll become a widow before you're a bride. Where is he? Isabella demanded. My loyal William? Sandra's smile was cruel. Long gone.
And soon to be very rich, once the accounts transfer.
All it costs is one troublesome son and his immigrant whore. Wrong, Isabella said calmly. Check your phone. Sandra's screen lit up with alerts. Every offshore account frozen. William Richardson's escape plane grounded. Amazing thing about revenge, Isabella continued. It makes you predictable. William used the same transfers, same escape route he planned for my mother.
When she threatened to expose him.
So I documented everything, Jamie added, as FBI agents swarmed the house. While you were so focused on Isabella.
Later, safe in Jamie's arms, Isabella watched William Richardson face new charges.
Sandra Cooper had turned on him, revealing decades of crimes in exchange for leniency.
You really would have sacrificed everything, Jamie murmured.
To save me.
No, Isabella corrected him.
To save us. All of us.
Her hand rested on her belly. Some debts are paid with justice, not vengeance. As they drove back to Manhattan, Isabella thought about cycles broken and bridges built.
About a child who would know only love, not manipulation.
About family forged in fire, stronger than blood. But even now, as one chapter ended, she felt the stirring of another beginning.
For in New York's glittering towers and shadowed streets, no victory is ever truly final.
1 year later, Isabella sat in the nursery of their Upper West Side brownstone, rocking baby Alexander Robert Martinez Richardson to sleep. The morning sun painted patterns across his peaceful face, a face that held traces of both his Richardson heritage and his Martinez strength. A soft knock announced Jamie's arrival. "The papers are ready," he said quietly, careful not to wake their son.
Everything we've worked for. Today marked the launch of the Martinez Richardson Foundation, dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and fighting corporate fraud. Its first initiative? A scholarship program in Rosa Martinez's name.
"Mother would have loved him," Isabella whispered, looking at their sleeping child. "She sees him," Jamie assured her, kneeling beside the rocking chair.
"Through you. Through everything we've built." The foundation's opening ceremony gathered an unlikely family. Harold Bennett, now its legal director. David Chen, heading the cybersecurity division.
Even Jessica, who'd found her calling teaching ethics and mentoring fraud investigators. As Isabella took the podium, she saw faces in the crowd that marked her journey. Former Richardson and Associates employees who'd lost everything for speaking up.
Young accountants and lawyers, eager to make a difference.
And in the back, a group of cleaning staff, the invisible workers who, like her mother, saw everything but were rarely seen themselves. "My mother taught me that true power isn't in what you take," she began, "but in what you build. Not in who you destroy, but in who you lift up." From his maximum security cell, William Richardson watched the ceremony on TV, his empire now transformed into something he'd never imagined. His final attempt at revenge had accomplished what decades of honest work couldn't. It had united his fractured family around a common purpose. Later that evening, Isabella visited her mother's grave, Alexander sleeping peacefully in his carrier. "We did it, Mama," she whispered in Spanish. "We turned their weapons into our tools. Their hatred into our strength." Jamie found her there at sunset, wrapping a warm coat around her shoulders.
Ready to go home? Almost. Isabella placed a framed photo against the headstone, little Alexander wearing the same Christmas sweater she'd worn in her own baby pictures.
Just making sure she knows her legacy lives on. As they walked through the cemetery, Isabella reflected on the twists of fate that had brought her here. She'd sought revenge but found redemption. Chased power but discovered purpose. Lost a mother but built a family.
"What are you thinking?"
Jamie asked, noticing her thoughtful smile.
"That sometimes the happy ending isn't where you thought it would be," she replied. "It's better."
Alexander stirred, opening eyes that held both Richardson blue and Martinez brown, a living bridge between two worlds once divided by hate and fear. The next morning, Isabella would return to work, fighting for justice in boardrooms and courtrooms. Jamie would continue transforming his family's old business connections into forces for positive change.
Jessica would inspire another class of students to choose ethics over easy profit.
But tonight, in a quiet brownstone in a city that had seen both her greatest defeats and sweetest victories, Isabella Martinez Richardson held her son and felt the cycle finally break. The power her enemies had wielded to destroy had been transformed into the strength to build, protect, and heal. And somewhere, she knew, Rosa Martinez was smiling. For in the end, the greatest revenge wasn't in destroying those who hurt you, but in using their weapons to forge a better world. A world where children like Alexander would grow up knowing that true power comes not from fear or greed, but from the courage to stand up, the strength to forgive, and the wisdom to transform enemy into family. Isabella kissed her sleeping son's forehead and whispered the words her mother had told her long ago, "Remember, mi amor, we bend, but we never break." Outside, Manhattan's lights twinkled like stars, a city of endless possibilities and second chances. And in that moment, Isabella knew that while her story might have started with revenge, it had ended with something far more powerful: love.